want to start by sharing my adventures with you of how a granddaughter of an Indian farmer chased her wildest dreams only to be awakened to a broader storyline. All of my life has led me here to share these experiences with you. I found blue skies where they were far from home. I grew up in India believing that I was equal. Not because I was, but because the dominant narrative told me so. When I moved to Europe, I could see through the cracks. I could see how power really works, subtly, structurally, globally. In this video series, I want to welcome you into that very personal journey through that awakening of unlearning traditional notions of success and understanding how even the most progressive systems export inequality and normalize exploitation, not just in the past, but right here, right now, and possibly in the future. This is the series about holding our past in compassion and reclaiming our future.
So Shivani, where are you from?
Before I answer where I'm from, I would say I belong to a beautiful set of family. I'm from a sunny place with a lot of culture, a lot of heritage, many beliefs, many ways of living and organizing and experiencing this world. I'm also born in a very loving family. I grew up rich in love, rich in laughter, rich in communities. And it's a different kind of richness. It's perhaps not an economical richness. Because let's be honest, I did grow up in a very simple family, very humble people. I come from an ancestry of farming. My grandfather is a farmer. His father, my great-grandfather, is a farmer. And they have spent lifetimes working with the earth, feeding people with the fruits of the earth. That's where I'm from.
What did you awaken from?
I guess I have to give a little bit of context to answer that. As I mentioned, my ancestors, my grandfathers, grandmothers, they inherited and lived in a very interesting time. In a time where my country was living under a foreign power. And they inherited a very interesting history with a tiny country that we now call England. And I understood the struggles that not just my grandfather went through, but the country in its entirety went through. The exploitation that they went through. In South Asia specifically, our arts, our culture, our national narrative has been able to hold that history and pass down and make us understand what that was. The freedom struggle and the mass resistance movement is very ingrained in our upbringing. We've seen movies about what our ancestors went through, how they got together. We've understood what Mahatma Gandhi did, the non-violence movement. We've understood what Bhagat Singh did, which was the more violent part of the resistance. But all of them were resisting against a sort of a tyranny. They're saying, stop. This is exploitation, this is violence, and we won't We won't be mistreated any longer. What that national narrative failed to capture was it wasn't just my country that went through this story. Growing up, I always thought it was just an isolated event in history that happened between my country and another imperial power. It's when I moved to France and I met francophones, when I met people coming from beautiful sunny places that I had never been to, like the North African countries such as Morocco and Tunisia, even the Caribbean islands like Guadeloupe, Martinique. It's when I met these people, these immigrants from these places, that I understood, wait, how is this possible? How can you and your ancestors experience the same thing halfway across the world that me and my ancestors faced? They didn't stop there. My work, thank you for the career that I've had, made me travel to South America. And there, in the ancient land of the Mayans, in a beautiful place called Mexico, I could hear a very similar influence, the Spanish influence and the influence of the modern day USA in the sounds of a very familiar traffic. When I went to Brazil, I understood and learned about the Portuguese invasion and the language that it left on their tongue and how they beautifully absorbed it and made it their own. And now it's not even Portuguese anymore, it's Brazilian Portuguese. And that's when it all came together. That's when I understood that most of these vast regions of the world, rich in mineral, rich in natural resources, were once ex-colonies for a handful of nations. And that's when something shifted. That's when I started asking questions like, how is this normalized? How does this mass form of organization happen that could allow this mass form of exploitation? And what systems and legacies did that leave behind? And could those same systems and legacies be still going on and continuing to normalize certain form of exploitation? That's where it all changed. In this section, I want to start by sharing a map with you. A map that has been left out of our classroom. This is a map of the past 500 years of global power games. Starting from 1492, when Christopher Columbus landed in South America, marking the beginning of systematic European colonization, up until a very recent democratic world. This map shows the massive territories conquered and held by European powers. What this essentially represents is the transfer of resources, of precious minerals, high demand spices, even staple items like rice, cotton, coffee, and sugar from vast regions of the world to a handful of nations. For the merit of our discussion, I'm going to refer to countries that were subjected to these colonial exploits as the Global South, and the countries that led these advances as the Global North. Global North consists of countries in North Europe, North America, Russia, Australia, and New Zealand, while Global South consists of countries in South America, Asia, including Asia Pacific, and Africa. Global North consists of the world's developed nation, whereas Global South consists of the world's developing and least developed nations. These terms are used to illustrate the global power dynamics and inequalities rather than geographical location. You will find them threaded throughout this video and also mentioned in my book, The Rising Lotuses. What this means is we can literally take the world map and cut countries into a pie cake based on the history they have inherited. The pie would be split something like this, approximately 30% going to the Great Britain for the number of countries they colonized. About 18% would be claimed by France for a bold legacy of being the second largest colonial empire. Some 10% by Spain. Portugal and Russia wouldn't be far behind with 5 to 8% share each. And some further thinner slices would be consumed by the Dutch, the Belgians, and the Germans. Interestingly, modern-day USA has successfully replicated this model and has a very similar history with some of these developing nations. For a very long time, I believed in the dominant narrative that the developed world had earned its place through hard work, innovation, and discipline. Nobody told me the truth, that the wealth of the global north is intertwined with the wounds of the global south, that the most beautiful lands, rich in minerals, cultures, and possibilities, were ex-colonies, and many still are in more subtle and more polite ways. It took me 30 years to understand this, to cut through the noise. My intention in this section is to hold you in the space of that realization, to claim that most developing countries are not behind, they're simply recovering from centuries of exploitation, of stolen labor, stolen land, stolen future. Recovering from an inheritance we are forced to receive, of devalued currency and tight chains of generational debt. Yes, unfortunately, in the process, we are burning down our ancient forest, our rivers are grey with greed, and our air is laced with ashes of ambition. Not because we don't care, but because survival demands it. Born in India in the 90s, I had already inherited two things: an air rich with smog and a currency weighed down by history. India's air by then was already 8 times more toxic than what was considered safe. And our economy, merely 5 decades post-independence, was already burdened with $83 billion in external debt. I did not choose the storyline. None of us do. But over the years, I have met brilliant minds, sat across conference tables with economists, investors, bankers, entrepreneurs. And what I've come to understand is that most of them do not consider this currency inequality a legacy, but rather a market outcome. I've also found it fascinating how entrepreneurs globally leverage this injustice and never question it, how they use all their intelligence for personal gains, outsource production, insource profit. Just look at your Zara t-shirts. But rarely, if ever, I've seen the same intelligence used to fix the root causes of the system, to question the games that we have mastered so well. And my intention in this section is to hold you in the space and unpack some of these complex topics, because truth is sometimes hard, but also always very simple. Most people would agree that colonization was a terrible period in history. Most people would also say, well, that was in the past. Shh, let the dead rest. But what if the ghost of colonization still haunt us? Born in the largest ex-colony of the largest colonial empire, I was part of that second group of people. I thought colonization was a closed chapter, done and dusted. But history does not fold so easily. It echoes, it lingers, it seeps into the price of rice, the cost of fuel, and the value of a passport. What I did not realize was how recent this freedom is and how long the shadows of the past still stretches. For context, let's look at the timeline of colonization. From 1492, colonization lasted 500 years, with a period of decolonization marked with mass resistance movements. In contrast, the post-colonial democratic period is remarkably recent, and this is the world we have inherited. Countries in South Asia experienced over 200 years of exploitation, and a similar story follows for countries in South America and Africa. In comparison, these countries have been independent for less than a century. Freedom, my dear friend, is indeed a very recent flavor. Most of the global South has barely had time to stretch its legs before being thrust into a world designed by and for the global North. Because freedom is still learning to walk, we need to hold it firmly. And the pillar that crumbles the fastest is often that of a devalued currency. Have you ever wondered why most ex colonies or developing countries have weak currencies? Is it really just economic evolution, or could it be a sophisticated form of continuation of a very old story? Midze. It's a term you hear often in Haiti. It is used to express a lived reality of more than poverty, of misery. Haiti is an archetype of creation of poverty. We're going to use it as an example to understand how most developing and underdeveloped countries are stuck in a vicious debt cycle and how exploitation was sold as development. For nearly 3 centuries, coffee pulsed at the heart of life in Haiti. As a former French colony, Haiti was the biggest supplier of coffee and sugar that poured in Parisian kitchens and Hamburg coffee houses. It made many French families astonishingly rich. It built fortunes. It even helped fund the Eiffel Tower. All this wealth from Haitian soils, from Haitian labor, and yet none of it remained in Haitian hands. The story of Haiti is a mesmerizing one between what seems impossible and what seems shockingly evil. At the end of 18th century, the Haitians became the first enslaved people in modern history to lead a successful revolution to outthrow their colonizers. Long before Britain abolished slavery, long before the Civil War broke out in America, Haiti's freedom came with a heavy price tag. French colonists, few years later, sent a fleet of warships armed with 500 cannons and one ultimatum: repatriation for former slaveholders. Barely independent and militarily fragile, Haiti was forced to comply. Thus began the world's first ransom for emancipation. The amount? So staggering that the first installment alone was 6 times Haiti's annual income. But the story does not end there. Friendship had a second mission to ensure the former colony takes out a loan from young French banks to make the payments. This became known as Haiti's double debt, the ransom and the loan to pay it. A ransom paid to former slaveholders and a loan taken to do so. Thus began Haiti's vicious debt cycle. The interest, the commissions, the repayments, even the banker's fee surpassed the Haitian government's total revenue that year. And so, generations later, the descendants of revolutionaries find themselves shackled in numbers, not chains of iron, but chains of credit, of compound interest, of colonial debt disguised as policy. The thing is, Haiti is not an outlier. It is a mirror. Across the global south, newly independent nations were handed the keys to freedom, but locked into systems designed to keep profits flowing to the global north. Financial institutions, global policies, and post-colonial aid came laced with conditions, a silent continuation of the same extraction logic, this time dressed in suits and spreadsheets. Because the thing is, when we talk about currency inequality, we are not talking about economics, we're talking about memory and the systems that decide whose freedom gets a prize.
I also think that, the dominant narrative is the masses will bring the change. And I think I'm bored of that narrative. Masses, most of us, we do not have the influence to change these higher level power dynamics that shape our everyday lives. Yes, what we can do is hold each other in community and spaces of this realization. But I think a big part of my message is for the people who are watching this who have a certain influence, and for them to have a moment of realization and empathy and question themselves the path that they are on. What are they really working on? What solutions are they really working on? And are they really serving the masses and what we need? What is the history that we've inherited? What are the notions of progress and success you have come to internalize, and how close to reality they might or might not be?